Yeah, so my background, my name is Matthew Holman. I grew up in the Bay Area in Northern California, East Bay. Like a lot of kids there, really great affluent area. Parents got divorced when I was 8. Again, very typical like millennial story, born in 1980. So it's like what I feel like everybody was going through, or a lot of people. And came out to, let's see, so yeah, grew up in California, came out to Utah to go to school at BYU. And so that's where a lot of my interesting story stuff happens. But for me now, currently living in Utah, I've been here for 20 plus years, married, a couple of step kids and another kid on the way, which is really exciting. And I'm really active in the community here in Utah. I do a lot of stuff on LinkedIn, events, marketing, all that stuff. Love running, outdoors. Yeah. I mean, the joke is that my dad is a psychiatrist and my mom is a therapist, which, as the saying goes, like maybe not a great combination. My dad feels like he knows better than everybody, and my mom is dealing with her own stuff and her own past and traumas and things like that. So, growing up was kind of hard. Like my mom was really difficult, kind of single parent, actually particularly traumatizing in some sense. Like, so that was really, really negative. She and I are pretty good, but it's kind of one of those things of like, she's not your typical mom. She's not like warm, loving, flying out here to see the grandkids kind of thing. Like she's, again, dealing with her own stuff, her own demons. And then my dad, we have a big misunderstanding, that's maybe an understatement. He believes the police, according to some facts to my case, and doesn't believe me in my version, and that has driven a wedge between us. So we've chatted a few times while I was incarcerated, but really he and I aren't close. It's actually easier for me to just sever all contact. Yeah, so the path of the justice system is like actually I think one rooted in like, for me, like human behavior and happiness and religion. So I grew up very religious. I was raised, like we're in Utah, so it's probably not a surprise for a lot of people, but growing up in California, I was raised a member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, very strong religious stuff. And in many ways, I felt like I wasn't living up to the standard I was supposed to be. And amongst some of my own other childhood trauma stuff with my mom and parents' divorce, like kind of depressed, like again, it's not that atypical of a story, but being at BYU, feeling kind of like inadequate, what ended up happening, dating like most people do, wasn't going on a mission like when I should. So there was, again, some of that kind of like against external pressure. And one day I get a call that the police want to talk to me. And I thought it was my dad as a psychiatrist living in Utah. I thought he had been telling me some stories of stuff that had been going on with some of his clients, not confidential, but stuff that had been happening to him. So I thought maybe it's something that happened to my dad or something like that. But no, when they brought me in to talk to me, it was because somebody had come forward and said that I had sexually assaulted them. So it was a very huge surprise to me. And what I didn't understand at the time, and as part of the justice system, was I should have asked for a lawyer. I didn't think I did anything wrong, so I felt fine talking to them and all this stuff. I find out later that they do have these tactics and techniques to try to make you think all these things. One of them was they had a blood test and a DNA report sitting on the table that I thought they just left from their previous interview. But I realized later, I was explaining to my attorney, it was as a tactic to try to scare me, like they had evidence on me, but I knew I hadn't done anything. So, and that's ultimately, so what ends up happening is walk through as a girl I had dated. We had actually not even had sex. We had fooled around a little bit, didn't want to. I was maybe a dick about it, like, to be perfectly clear, like, and then that became in her version, it had become incredibly violent and horrible, like sexual assault a couple times. So, and I say that because that's what it says about me in a news article, like, and they make it sound like that's what I've admitted to. What ends up happening out of that interview, my dad believes the police, doesn't believe me, kicks me out of the house. Living on my own, trying to figure all this stuff out. They didn't bring charges because she actually hadn't made a statement. This was just something her parents had said, like one of these really weird, like he said, she said kind of things. And then a couple months go by, living on my own, like, again, really depressed, trying to fight through all this stuff, and decide to, like, you know what, if I'm going to be treated like a criminal and all this stuff, I might as well be one. So I got this really wild idea that case of the f***its, and I went and robbed a bank. The reason behind the bank robbery was there was really two elements. Was I'd been working at a McDonald's and was kind of fine, and then McDonald's doesn't pay much, so I got a job at a telemarketing place, which was not a great combo for like my current state of mental health, and so I like quit. So I wasn't going to get enough money for rent, basically. And I had a grandpa who had helped me out a little bit and would have helped me out more if I had said something, but I didn't. I was like, I wanted to be okay and was fine, while at the same time, like, you know, seeing movies of people glorifying crime and stuff like that. So it was a little bit of like, I need money to survive. I'm going to go take it, because that was my frame of mind, which again, complete opposite of what I should have done. What? So rob a bank, don't get caught. Walk away with the money. Again, I wouldn't call it a fun story. That's the interesting one that everybody likes hearing about. But to me, it's like, again, it's the dumbest thing I've ever done in my life. So I'm usually not like that proud or happy to tell it from a, you know, great job kind of thing. But they don't catch me for that. I finally get charged on the sexual assault stuff, and fighting through that trial or fighting through all that process, ultimately I decided to take a plea bargain, because they were charging me with like 15 to life sentences. I hadn't been caught on the bank and was feeling incredibly guilty about it. So in my mind, it made sense to plead to attempted rape. Attempted rape, you could, in one version of the universe, I could see where she felt like that's what had actually happened. So maybe that's what I really did, you know, so I'll do some time, maybe do a year or something like that. That's what my attorneys thought. That is not what ended up happening from a time standpoint. So I was, took a plea deal. Then once again, things I didn't understand, my attorneys, they didn't go run anything in the news because they didn't want things to get blown out of proportion. Once I took a plea deal, they ran several articles. And that's what's kind of disappointing, is that it makes it sound like I'm readily admitting to being this monster, which is very frustrating. And then once I was in the system, this is all around 2000, 2001. Once I was in the system, they came to me, they finally had caught up with evidence on the bank robbery. So robbed a bank a few months before 2000, before 9/11. FBI is totally backlogged with a bunch of stuff over the 9/11 case. Once that all gets filtered through, they finally process some of my evidence, come and charge me. I'm in the system at that point. It's kind of a no-brainer. They charge me here in Utah, the state level. I actually take a plea bargain. So my sentencing going into Utah was I was on a 1 to 16 year sentence. I was really lucky. The judge ran those sentences concurrently. He didn't like the parole board. Again, initially I thought I would do a year or two based off of what lawyers think and matrix and stuff like that. But I got a 6-year initial hearing right out of the gate. So my prison time I did 15 years. It's a funny thing, because a lot of people, they ask me that, well, you must have done something to do 15 years. And my response is always, well, they think that you do something. That's why they give you the time. The time is not a representation of what you actually did or didn't do. But yeah, model inmate, went to school. Like, again, that's a big part of my journey, is like how I tried to change and look at who I am and the decisions that led me there. And like my biggest takeaway is like around help, not feeling comfortable asking for help, struggling, depression, all those things. I'm not okay. You know, like when I was on my own after being kicked out of school, that I wasn't okay. And I wanted to rob a bank, right? Like that type of thing. So that's kind of like a big part of that. How I got introduced to the criminal justice system, I guess, was the original question. But yeah, that's how I got involved in the system. Was something I didn't do, made really bad choice to go kind of make it a lot worse, and took a plea deal to try to lessen the impact that would have. And I think it mattered because I'm not still incarcerated, but yeah, still did 15 years. Yeah, it's structured the system's structured to, like, you know, depending on who you are, like, you know, you could go rob a liquor store and they're going to give you 5 different crimes that you committed in the process of that. So you'll plead down to the thing that you actually did. So to make it simpler for everybody and just process you through the system. Like the TV shows about like fighting it out, like the public defenders, like the witnesses, that basically never happens. And you know, and the idea that you're still presumed innocent is, I mean, when I was given my bail hearing, the judge, like, he actually said, like, I get the presumption of innocence and everything, but what did we give that guy earlier today? And he was referencing a guy who was like a serial child molester, and they gave me the same bail that he got. And I was like, oh, okay. And the same thing, like when they do like your discovery, like, it's all just a system of getting people in the door. And so that's the problem, is like, I thought once I talked to the police, I would tell them the truth. They would filter out reality. And if I did something wrong, I would be charged. And that's how I approached the interview. It's like, in my mind, she was 17, I was 19. Okay, maybe something I did wrong. Found out later that Utah 17 is an age of consent. I didn't do anything related to her age that was illegal. They were charging me with not statutory rape. They were trying to charge me with rape. And so, but the whole idea is, once those officers get tagged in that something might have been happened, the ball's already been rolling. They actually don't care about discovering the truth of what happened. That's, again, one of my biggest issues with our TV system is, like, you watch Law and Order and they're like, a fact that doesn't fit, they're like, oh, it must have been this. That's not how it works. They make the facts fit to what their objective is. The prosecutor's the same way. The prosecutor just gets the case from the police. Do we have enough evidence to convict? We'll proceed. The judge is, in many instances, just facilitating that. They're not, so, and the same thing when you go in front of the parole board and all these other things in Utah. It's the idea that you're presumed innocent, or that the system is like trying to figure this stuff out. Another really big complaint is like the idea of like plea deals make you guilty, or like confessions mean you're guilty. But, there's all these documentaries and studies around people that have pled guilty to crimes they didn't commit because they were trying to avoid the death penalty. They were trying to avoid like police tactics around those things. So it's really hard for people to get into those shoes of like why you do that. Like, oh, I would never confess to that. Well, I didn't actually confess to it, but they got me to twist my words up a little bit so that made it sound like I was guilty and I was trying to like get out of something. So that's what my attorney told me, was if they put that video on the stand, it'll make you look guilty. Yeah. So as far as prison like experiences, I was really lucky in many ways. And, depending on your I'm not a religious person anymore. Try to be spiritual, but you could say I had a little bit of a guardian angel or 10. Two key events. I enrolled in a college program that was going on there. And so the college program was like a dedicated unit. So I was living with people that I might not otherwise have lived around. And initially, being a smart kid and having gone to a little bit of college, like I was trying to be helpful or useful. And some of my friends back then tell me some of them thought about beating me up because I was, acting like a know-it-all. But honestly, what ended up happening was that as an experience allowed me to meet people and become friends with people that might not otherwise have been gang leaders, people have done 20, 30 years, like a lot of kind of tough cookies, and I probably don't like being called cookies, tough customers. And so that kind of changed how I was viewed. Nobody ever thought I was like super hard or extremely tough or whatever, but I kept my word and wasn't a rat and all that stuff. So it was like, I was a solid guy as we looked at in the prison sentence, but nobody was like scared of me, but they were scared of my friends. And so it, in some ways, like offered like a lot of safety and protection because I made friends with people that I might not have otherwise known. And then another really like tragedy happened. My grandfather, I was about 3 years in, the grandfather I mentioned who had helped me out a little bit, he and I became extremely close throughout all this court proceedings and all this stuff. And I was actually living down in LA with him and some other family while we were kind of fighting the case. And then he came to visit me and I talked to him a lot. About 3 years in, he was murdered by a younger half-brother over some money stuff. And so lost him. But again, like one of these kind of like weird, so I just still miss him even to this day, is one of my really good friends and his cellmate, both guys that had done 20, 30 years and were just the toughest as they come customers. And this friend had done time in California, was in many ways, we're good friends, but in many ways, one of the scariest people I've ever met. And talking with out of that, my dad, who I hadn't talked to in 3 years, was the one who told me over the phone. And so we were talking about this grief over losing someone, and our relationships with our fathers, because both of these guys had been in the criminal justice system at a very young age and had very fraught relationships with their dads, and had lost them while they were incarcerated. And so out of that relationship with these guys, I became really, really good friends with both of them. And this other guy's name's Tom, got me a job at the sign shop, which was minimum wage. I was making like $3 an hour, $4 an hour, which in prison is like, it's like making 300, 400K out here. It's just nuts. And that closeness and those relationships, is what kind of, again, set me up for making 15 years like worth something in some ways. Great job, schooling, friends, and education. But for me, like my biggest watershed moment was I'd been in about 9 years, maybe 10 years. And as much as I tried to like fight some of the things, like didn't really do drugs, I didn't get any tattoos. I didn't really do any of the fun stuff that people usually do. But I still had become kind of like my own slow descent into darkness, cutting myself off from all feeling, that kind of thing. And the story is, I woke up one day, my shoulder, my rotator cuff, something was wrong. I couldn't like lift it up, and the prison medical system is like, here's some ibuprofen, stop using it. And so I didn't go to the doctor or anything, but we actually had a yoga instructor that would come in every other week, and she would bring in books. She ran a nonprofit out here and would bring in books donated to the library and teach a yoga session. And I had a friend who was going, and DJ gets me to go to yoga to try to help my shoulder. And it does. Been there about a month, and downward dog is amazing if anybody's, wondering about how to fix something. But so next thing you know, me and a ton of hardcore criminals stuff are going to yoga every week. And this sweet lady, after about a year of trying to get us to like meditate and stuff, which we were not interested in at all, she gave me this book on the Yoga Sutras. And reading that, there was this kind of like mantra around, or this question of like, where are you at socially, physically, emotionally, mentally? And I can still remember to this day of asking myself that and feeling completely empty on all 4 counts. So that was kind of like my inflection point of this into the darkness, cutting myself off from feeling, being cliquey, trying to not be who I was. And then my journey out of that, of taking ownership for my life, switching jobs to something that was more challenging. For a while, church, but after that, spirituality, getting into shape physically and discovering running and all these things. And those last 5-6 years of my time in there, about just trying to take ownership for my life, for my happiness, trying to live the life that I would want for myself if I wasn't incarcerated, stop pushing things off into the future. And that journey has continued to this day, of trying to walk the path that I want to be on and be the person that I want to be on, and see how I can impact the world around me. Because one of the things I hate about prison is just this like element of like, we don't like him because he's this, and we don't like this guy because he's that. And it's like, well, okay, I get that, but he's been kind to me. Like, I think we could be kind back, right? Like, I think there's a level of kindness for a lot of people that are in a very similar situation is lacking, right? Like, we've all done some really bad things and or made really big mistakes to get here, and we have very little empathy for everyone else's mistakes. But that's what we do to make ourselves feel better. Is, that's why there's a hierarchy in prison. I think these campaigns are important because it humanizes the experience. And so for me, when I did that, even people that, like, I had somebody I had done a little bit of work with, and he's pretty big in the e-commerce community. He's like, hey, can I take you to lunch? I just want to know more about your experiences. And he's like, I've never met anybody that's in prison. So I told him my whole story, because he was very open and receptive and just curious. And so that was a really positive, and he and I are really good friends. And I know that I have other female friends. Like, man, that's some of the fear too, of like, regardless of what I did or didn't do, like on paper, it's really easy to see sexual assault. He's a bad guy. Well, I have tons of women in my network that I've worked with and done events and all this stuff with that are aware of what happened. and they know me for who I am. They judge me for who I've showed up in their lives. And I know, because I had this experience recently, we did a marketing event in Silicon Slopes at the University of Utah, and the speaker in the smaller room was just trying to go through he was asking, is anybody like trans? Is anybody this or that? Trying to get a reaction because he was trying to do this psychology experiment. Who here's ever robbed a bank? Was one of the things. And I'm like, because again, at the time I try whenever possible to show up as this is part of who I am. And he was like, wait, what? Talked about it a little bit. And I had a friend there, Catherine, who was sitting across from me and just chimed in like, he is a great guy. That story does not define who he is and who he's trying to be. And afterwards she gave me a big hug. She's like, I'm sorry, I just felt like I had to defend you. I was like, so I know that there's a lot of people, because they've met me and know at least a little bit about my story, that now out in the world, they're showing up that way of being more open about being more like, so campaigns like 1 in 3, it humanizes, it tells a story. It becomes less about some newspaper story or something that gets, create this huge like story in a movie or story of like how horrible, like this is a real person. Regardless of like they've made mistakes, bad choices, situations. Like I met the gamut in prison of guys that, they needed to be there, to guys that they never stood a chance. Foster kids that are abused, like they never stood a chance. And so trying to like a campaign like this is like, I'm a real person. Like I'm not saying like what I did is okay, but that's not like, that doesn't identify, like define who I am. That is a mistake that I made and that I'm like motivates me in a great way. Right. And so same thing for all of the mistakes we make in our lives. It's like, we're still human beings. Like, am I trying to do better? Am I trying to do best? Like, I maybe can't make it up to some people or not, but for everyone else, I'm trying to show up in a way that's impactful. And so with Fair Chance Hiring, for me, it's like, it's all about looking in the past instead of looking at who somebody's supposed to be. And if you take that off the table and you think about the way most companies hire, is they're looking for somebody who's a good culture fit, can do the job, like potentially is going to want to move up in the company and like going to give their heart and soul to all those things. Except if you have a record, then now none of that actually matters because we're really, really concerned about all these other factors. Fair Chance Hiring, I'll just launch with some of my own pet peeves. So one of the things that I hate is like research has shown, like for financial crimes, you get screened for whether you've committed a crime in the past. So if somebody's committed a crime, you can't work in something that's sensitive to money. And yet the number one indicator for financial crimes committed is personal, how you manage your own expenses and costs. Like somebody's in debt, right? People that are in higher debt are more likely to commit financial crimes than people that are solvent, and yet the lens that we put on people is whether they've had committed a crime or not, right? That we don't worry about for anybody else. And so it's just one of these things of like, we're worrying about something that's already done that actually isn't linked to the likelihood of them committing a crime or doing something wrong to your company. Most of the time, it's a legal system. It's all about liability. Like the real reason we do background checks, and this isn't just like, society according to Matt, I have a lot of experience in this, and this is actually the area that my wife works in, is because if somebody sues us, we need to have as many box checked that we were protecting ourselves, our employees. That is literally the reason why it happens. Because the liability, if there's an assault at work, is bad enough, but if they were a criminal and you knew about it or didn't check, it becomes twice or 3 or 4 times as much for somebody's ability to sue a company. That is literally the reason why we do background checks. And because it makes us all feel good that we're protecting our employees or building a company of integrity and things like that. So I think the role for background checks should only be in very, very limited situations where there's something sensitive related to the role, whether it's sensitive personal data, related to like the types of people. Like a company I was going to go work for, I was going to be working with a bunch of 19 and 20-year-old college women. So I get why guy with my record, they would say like, hey, that just, we think that might not be a good fit. But some of these other roles, like we would be willing to talk about it. So I'm not sure other than that is if it really makes much sense. At the end of the day, like, just seen it too many times of like the problems are with stuff that you can't see in a background check with somebody who hasn't actually committed a crime. That's where the real liability is, but it's why we're a marginalized population, because it's easy to just shove us to the side. Yeah, so thinking through the types of changes, or what I would say to a CEO that was thinking about implementing fair chance hiring and what kind of changes they potentially could want to make. I think that, well, I'll say a couple things. I remember saying this to a lawmaker once about, I thought Utah wanted to be a leader in responsibility and accountability and things like that. And so I think that anybody who's trying to build something, do you want to build something that can be better than what it was before? And so for me, like, fair chance hiring is really all about, do you want to include people that are going to be exceptionally loyal, that are going to work really hard, that have had a lot of like hard chances or bad chances and are willing to grab like a lifeline, anything good that comes their way? Because that's what happens when you hire people that have had, experiences with the justice system. I would say, like, beyond that though, if like you just don't want to do background checks anymore, like, think about what you can do with your company. Like I mentioned before about creating a system of accountability and trust and appropriate boundaries and all these types of things that most of corporate America actually lacks. Again, it's just an easy thing to think about. We're just going to not hire this, or we want to make sure we know stuff about our employees when we hire them, so we're going to ask even if we don't do anything about that. Like, it's the total wrong mindset. That's like a zero-sum game. You're looking at loss and loss prevention instead of like where the opportunity is. Who can we hire? Who can we enable? Who can we have work really, really well for our company? So I'd say too, like, if we're thinking about trying to think through like potential changes, like that's where I would want to think about of like, I'm more concerned about people, how they show up every day. Are they on time? Right? Like, those are indicators to me of like, of long-term success at a company. Like, there's more things that you have inside your company to know that somebody's going to be successful and do a good job for you than whether they have a background, a criminal background or not. So advice I give to anybody is, because early on in this journey, there's a process whether they're getting out or newly out, because I do talk to a lot of guys about this stuff all the time, friends or friends of friends getting out regularly. I have a pretty strong opinion on that. I mentioned earlier about when I got out, I didn't have any context. So for me, I think it's really important to remember that life is hard, whether you have a criminal record or not. There are other people that are struggling with mental health or race or gender, like all these other things that are going on for a lot of people. So if you spend a lot of time feeling like, woe is me because I have a criminal record, like, you're just going to be negative. You're going to feel that negativity all the time. So while you can't fully avoid it or escape it, try to look for opportunities to enable the life that you want to have. And part of that too is understanding the best way to get a job is through your own network. It's practicing soft skills like interviews and preparing resumes and understand how to talk about past work experiences, even practicing the interview process so that you understand how to talk about your criminal record when it comes out. I would say I'm a big proponent of being a little bit more upfront about it in some ways, reaching out to hiring managers or companies to see if they have what their hiring stance is on people that are with a criminal record. Because the last thing you want to do is spend all this time and energy going through all of that and then finding out that they won't because you were worried about bringing it up too soon and you just wasted your time and theirs. Whereas there's a lot of companies that are interested in hiring people with criminal records. Like Adobe here has a program to hire. Like, there's a lot of opportunity. It just is more work to try to sift through some of that. But understand that it is work, but it's work for everybody. Finding a job is hard. And then the next layer of that is spending time understanding what makes you happy, what motivates you, what you can be good at, how you can show up in the world. We've talked about a friend of mine that applied for a job with you once. It's like, I've talked to him about this stuff of how do you, what are your strengths and weaknesses? You're kind, thoughtful, considerate. Okay. What's a job where those are valued attributes, right? If you're doing cold calls all day, like, that's probably not a good opportunity, but relationships and partnerships, that sounds like a great opportunity. So it's like understanding more about what you can be good at, what you can be different at. I remember a job interview where a guy was asking me, like, tell me about, I brought up the prison stuff like fairly early on. And, he mentioned like, oh, well, tell me about a time you were working in like a stressful environment. And so I literally told him about what a day in the life of working in a print shop inside a prison was. He's like, oh, wow, okay. And then he's like, well, tell me about a time that you overcome something hard. And then he started laughing. He's like, oh, you just did. Okay. So it's like, you can learn how to turn some of that into a strength. It is different, but I have found, and again, I do think this is part of what makes me a little bit different, is trying to show up and be authentic, and remembering that everybody's a little afraid, a little scared and insecure, if not massively insecure, and being able to show that, like, again, I'm not proud that I did this, but I'm proud of who I am and who I'm trying to be. And I think like that is the final linchpin for me of finding happiness, is you got to learn to be comfortable in your own skin. Like, this doesn't define you, but you have to be comfortable talking about it, because if you're uncomfortable about it, or you're unsure, or if you're really paranoid about it, then that's how people are going to respond to you. And you're kind of also in some ways like you're not giving other people an opportunity to show up for you if you show up that way. So being genuine and authentic lets other people at least have the opportunity to be genuine. It doesn't always work out. I'm not saying it does, but that's, I think, a really important lesson to keep in mind. So we found out my wife's pregnant. We're about 20 weeks right now, so about halfway through it. And for a long time, I thought, we'd been married about 3 years now. And so for the first 2 years, I was hoping she was letting me leave the door open. She was okay with it, but maybe not like trying. But we kind of like started talking about maybe getting a vasectomy or something like that, kind of closing the door. She actually didn't want to, which was really nice. And then now I have this miracle baby boy on the way who's healthy and everything's looking really, really good. And for me, it honestly brings up a lot of like grief, because like I know that I do it, but over the course of our lives, we try to like find silver linings in hard things, and we cling to those things so that the hard things aren't as hard. So like if people meet me, they're like, oh, 15 years, that sounds horrible. I'm like, oh, actually wasn't that bad. Like made me into who I am. And while I do believe that, like that is a lifeline that I cling to, because otherwise thinking about how hard it was, like I might be overwhelming. So with the baby boy on the way, it's like a reminder of, I wanted that for so long. And the family was something that the more time I did felt less and less like an option for me. And then when I was out 37, 38, 39, I'm dating a lot of people who already had kids and already had a family and weren't really going to want to start over a new one. So for me, it's very much like I'm just over the moon excited, willing to turn my entire life upside down to try to accommodate this kid. And just really, really excited and feeling really like lucky. And I mean, other people say like it's like karma, like positive karma catching up, but I don't believe in karma that way. But you don't get stuff back because you're a good person. Things happen because you're a good person. Oh yeah, it's just amazing stuff. Yeah. So what do I wish I would have done differently around asking for help, or how do we reach out for help? That kind of problem. I have this, I remember a lot of lessons through like stories or something that's happened to me, right? And so one of the first things of when I was first out of prison, I'd been out just a couple months and enrolled in classes at the University of Utah. I was really, really scared because even though I'm like a smart guy, been like 10 plus years since I've been in school, all these kids are like fresh out of school, they're fresh out of their math classes and all this stuff. And so like they're all on it, right? I felt really overwhelmed and intimidated by that. And I remember distinctly sitting in like the back of one of my first classes, and people are kind of chit-chatting around, and a bunch of 19, 20-year-olds. And I sat there and realized they were all just as scared as I was, intimidated, worried who their friends were going to be, how their grades were going to go, how their career was going to start, all these things. It was very much similar anxiety and stress and things they're fighting through. And that like changed my perspective. I was still a little worried about being found out and being this fish out of water. But for the most part, it was like, oh, you're worried about the same thing I am. Do you want to do a study group? Like, do you want to share notes? Like, how are you prepping for this? And people are like, oh, yeah, like definitely. Like, and so I think for help, I think the first thing about help is, and this is what we do with my 13-year-old of like, she's a high stress, high anxious person. And I think the first thing is like, is first acknowledging that those feelings are valid, that they're okay feeling overwhelmed, and that you're not alone in the sense of like, you're not, maybe say not unique because you don't feel special, but we're all fighting through that. We're all trying to figure it out, how to manage stress and deal with our lives. And so if you can, I think, accept that it's okay. And then it's about finding people that you feel like you can be safe with to let them know what's going on. So it's not about walking up to the random person on the street. It's not about talking to your boss about, some mental health stuff you're going necessarily, unless your boss is your safe person. But it's starting with that circle of friends or family of like, hey, I'm not actually as good as you might think. And the funny thing with those types of conversations is when you tell somebody, I'm not as good as you think, usually the response is, wait, you think that I'm okay? Like, I'm not doing well either. And so that's where I would really hope for people asking help. It's, again, if I had just told an aunt or an uncle or my grandfather of, hey, I'm actually way over my head here. I don't know what's going on. I'm just in this perpetual cycle of depression and feeling like I have no escape. Somebody would have helped. Would it have been the best help? I don't know. That's the whole thing is it's a process. You can't expect the one person you reach out to be the perfect lifeline for you. You have to maybe sometimes move through a couple people to find what you need, to find that support. But there are so many hotlines and support groups and systems that exist in our state, in our country, in our world for helping people that want to help. And I think I'm one of them too. There are people that text me if they need help or are struggling with something. But that's, I'd say, is the biggest thing is acknowledge, understand that it's okay, that you're not alone, that other people are feeling these things and that people want to help. I really genuinely believe that people want to help. Even people in the system that I have felt angry at, the police officer that initially interviewed for me, he was doing his job, what he thought was right. To me, we're all trying to figure things out and do the best we can. So just trying to show up for that or being okay, understanding that that's happening, I think will be really helpful for people.